The screaming started before anyone even understood what was happening. A terrified white woman stood in the middle of the crowded supermarket, clutching a little blonde girl behind her legs while pointing with shaking fingers at a tall black man near the checkout line. "That's him!" she screamed. "He tried to take my daughter." Everything froze. Shopping carts stopped moving. A jar shattered somewhere near the frozen food aisle. People turned instantly toward the man she was accusing. Some stepped backward. Others pulled out their phones. Within seconds, the air inside the supermarket changed from normal afternoon noise to raw panic. The black man raised both hands slowly, confusion covering his face. "What are you talking about? Don't act innocent," the woman yelled. "I saw you talking to her near the candy aisle. Somebody call the police." A store employee immediately grabbed the phone behind customer service while another worker nervously moved closer to the little girl. The child looked overwhelmed and frightened by all the yelling. She kept glancing between the woman and the man like she did not understand why everyone was suddenly terrified. The man stood completely still. His name was Daniel Brooks, 38 years old, former Marine, single father, quiet man, calm voice, the kind of person who apologized when someone bumped into him instead of the other way around. But none of that mattered anymore, because once fear enters a room, people stop seeing humanity and start seeing danger. And in America, black men knew exactly how fast that could happen. Daniel slowly looked around at the crowd gathering near him. He saw suspicion spreading across faces before anyone even asked for facts. A white customer whispered, "He looks guilty." Another muttered, "I knew." Something felt off about him. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Not again. He had seen this look before. Too many times. The same look security guards gave him inside luxury stores. The same look nervous women gave him in elevators. The same look police officers gave him during traffic stops, even while he wore military uniform. Years ago, while serving overseas, Daniel survived explosions, gunfire, and war zones. But somehow, standing inside a grocery store while strangers stared at him like an animal felt worse. The woman pulled the little girl closer. "Stay away from us." Daniel spoke carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am, I never touched your daughter. You were talking to her. She asked me where the cereal aisle was." "You expect us to believe that?" the woman snapped. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He already understood something painful. It did not matter what he said anymore. The accusation had already done its damage. A young employee near the registers whispered loudly, "Police are coming." That sentence hit the room like electricity. Several customers moved farther away from Daniel. One man stepped in front of his wife protectively. Another started recording with his phone. Daniel looked toward the little girl again. She seemed confused, more than scared. He noticed tears beginning to form in her eyes because of the chaos surrounding her. Then suddenly the little girl quietly said something almost nobody heard. "That's not true." But the woman kept yelling over her. "That man was following her." "I wasn't following anyone," Daniel replied firmly. The woman pointed aggressively. "You people always say that." The second those words came out, silence swept across the nearby aisles. Daniel felt the sting immediately, not just because of the racism, but because of how casually she said it, like she had said those words many times before. An older black woman near the produce section shook her head slowly. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Daniel took a slow breath. Every instinct inside him told him to walk away before police arrived and things became dangerous. But he also knew walking away would make people think he was guilty. So he stayed still. The supermarket manager finally rushed over, sweating nervously. "Sir, I need you to remain here until officers arrive." Daniel looked at him carefully. "You think I kidnapped somebody?" The manager avoided eye contact. "We just need to be careful." Daniel almost laughed from disbelief. Careful. Funny how people always became careful around black men but careless with accusations against them. The woman continued speaking dramatically to everyone nearby. "I turned around for 1 second, and he was talking to my daughter. He was trying to lure her away." "That's not what happened," Daniel said quietly. "Then why were you speaking to her?" "'Cause she spoke to me first." The little girl tugged on the woman's sleeve nervously. "Mom, not now, Lily," the woman snapped. Daniel noticed the child flinch slightly. A police siren echoed outside moments later. The tension inside the store immediately doubled. 2 officers entered quickly, hands already near their belts while scanning the crowd. The first officer was tall, white, spaced. The second was younger, Latino, watching carefully without speaking. The white woman rushed toward them dramatically. "Thank God you're here. That man tried taking my daughter." Several people pointed toward Daniel instantly. The officers turned toward him. Daniel slowly lifted his hands again. "Officer, I didn't touch anybody." The older officer approached cautiously. "Sir, I'm going to need you to keep your hands where I can see them." Daniel nodded calmly even though humiliation burned through him. The officer asked, What happened here? Before Daniel could answer, the woman interrupted loudly. He approached my daughter while I was shopping. I think he was trying to kidnap her. The entire store listened carefully. Daniel looked directly at the officer. That's false. The younger officer finally spoke. Did anyone actually see him grab the child? Nobody answered immediately. People looked around awkwardly, because suddenly they realized something uncomfortable. Most of them had only reacted to the screaming, not facts. The older officer looked at Daniel. Why were you speaking to the little girl? Daniel answered calmly. She asked me where the cereal aisle was because she couldn't find her mother. The woman exploded again. That's a lie. Then finally, the little girl spoke louder. No, it's not. Everybody turned toward her. The child's small voice shook slightly. I asked him where Mommy went. The woman froze. Lily looked up nervously. I got lost. The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner. Daniel remained silent. Lily continued softly. He told me to stay where I was so my mom could find me. The supermarket suddenly became painfully quiet. The woman's face changed from anger to panic. That's not what you told me, she said quickly. Yes, it is, Lily whispered. Daniel looked away for a moment, exhausted. The younger officer crouched near the child gently. Did this man touch you? Lily shook her head immediately. No, he was nice. The older officer straightened slowly while tension shifted across the room like a wave. Several customers who had looked terrified moments earlier now looked embarrassed. One woman quietly lowered her phone camera. But the damage was already done. Daniel's face was all over those recordings now. One accusation, one scream, one moment. That was enough. The white woman suddenly started stammering. I thought I was protecting my daughter. Daniel finally spoke again, and his voice carried more sadness than anger. No, he said quietly. You were protecting your fear. Nobody moved. Daniel looked around the supermarket at the faces staring back at him. Do you know what's exhausting? He continued softly. Walking into places every day knowing people already decided who you are before you even speak. The older officer slowly relaxed his posture. Sir, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Daniel gave a tired nod but did not smile. Because apologies never erased humiliation. They never erased fear. And they definitely never erased the memory of dozens of strangers instantly believing the worst about you. Then, something unexpected happened. Lily suddenly pulled away from her mother and ran toward Daniel. Several people gasped nervously. The little girl hugged his arm tightly and looked up at him crying. I'm sorry they were mean to you. Daniel's expression broke instantly. He knelt slowly beside her. You don't have to apologize, sweetheart. Yes, I do, she whispered. The entire room watched emotionally. Then Lily said words nobody expected. He reminds me of Dati. Daniel froze completely. The woman's face lost color again. The younger officer looked confused. What do you mean? Lily wiped her tears. My daddy was black too. Silence. Absolute silence. The woman looked horrified as everyone slowly turned toward her. Daniel stared at the woman carefully now, realizing something deeper was happening. The officer asked quietly, Ma'am, is that true? The woman's lips trembled. My ex-husband is black. Nobody spoke. The painful irony hung heavily in the air. A woman who once loved a black man had just publicly accused another black man of kidnapping without evidence simply because fear took over faster than logic. Daniel slowly stood up again. He looked at the woman, not with hatred, but disappointment. That little girl saw kindness, he said softly. You saw danger. The woman started crying quietly. I was scared. Daniel nodded sadly. Black men are always paying for other people's fear. The words hit harder than yelling ever could. Several customers looked down immediately. Even the officers seemed affected. The younger officer glanced around the store and noticed something disturbing. Almost everyone had instantly assumed Daniel was guilty before hearing a single fact. Not because of evidence, because of appearance, because of history, because America still carried old poison underneath polite smiles. Daniel picked up his grocery basket slowly. Milk, bread, cereal, chicken soup. Normal things from a normal life that had suddenly turned into public humiliation. The older officer asked gently, would you like us to escort you out safely? Daniel almost smiled at the sadness of that question. I shouldn't need protection because someone lied about me, he replied quietly. The officer lowered his eyes. Daniel turned toward the exit. But before leaving, he stopped near the crowd one final time. My son is 10 years old, he said calmly. And every day I pray people see a child before they see a threat when they look at him. Because if grown men can become suspects just for speaking to a lost child, then what chance does he have? Nobody had an answer. The store remained silent except for quiet crying from Lily. Daniel walked toward the doors while dozens of people watched him differently now, not as danger, not as suspicion, as a human being. But Daniel knew something painful they did not. Tomorrow, it would probably happen again somewhere else. Another elevator, another store, another accusation, another nervous glance. Because racism was not always burning crosses and screaming slurs anymore. Sometimes it was fear disguised as caution. Sometimes it was assumptions disguised as protection. Sometimes it sounded like a woman screaming inside a supermarket while everyone instantly believed her. As Daniel reached the doors, the younger officer suddenly called out, "Mr. Brooks?" Daniel turned slightly. The officer hesitated before speaking. "Thank you for staying calm." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he answered with words that stayed in that supermarket long after he walked away. Black people learn young that staying calm can be the difference between going home and not going home. The automatic doors opened. Cold evening air rushed inside. Daniel stepped out, carrying his groceries alone, while the sunset painted the parking lot orange and gold. Behind him, the supermarket remained frozen in guilt and silence. And inside, a little girl was still crying because she had just watched the world punish a good man for helping her. But maybe something important changed that day too. Maybe some people in that store finally understood what racism looked like when it wore ordinary clothes and used the word safety to hide itself. Maybe they finally understood how dangerous assumptions could become when fear spoke louder than truth. And maybe, years later, Lily would remember the calm black man who helped her when she was lost while everyone else only saw someone to fear. Because sometimes the people society suspects the fastest are the same people carrying the most kindness inside them. Daniel had almost reached his car when he heard footsteps running behind him across the parking lot. Mr. Brooks turned slowly. It was the supermarket manager, the same man who could not even look him in the eye earlier. Behind him came the two police officers, several employees, and unexpectedly, Lily and her mother too. The evening wind moved softly through the parking lot while traffic lights reflected across the wet pavement from an earlier rain. Daniel stood there quietly holding his grocery bags, exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. The manager stopped in front of him, breathing heavily. His voice shook with shame. "So please don't leave thinking all of us are okay with what happened." Daniel looked at him calmly. "But none of you stopped it either." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. The manager lowered his head immediately. One employee near the back suddenly started crying. "I believed her instantly," she admitted quietly. "I didn't even question it." Another worker whispered, "Me too." Then you nodded slowly, because that was the part people never understood. Racism was not always loud hatred. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was how quickly people accepted the worst version of a black person without needing proof. Lily suddenly walked closer again, holding something in her tiny hands. "A chocolate bar. I bought this for you," she said softly. "Because Mummy says when people are hurt, you should do something kind." Daniel stared at the candy for a second before kneeling carefully in front of her. "You didn't hurt me, sweetheart." "But they did," Lily whispered. The parking lot became silent again. Daniel gently accepted the chocolate bar, and for the first time that evening, a real smile touched his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then Lily wrapped her arms around him again. Her mother stood nearby, crying openly now, unable to even look at Daniel properly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said through tears, "but I need you to know I'm ashamed of myself." Daniel stood slowly. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "The scary part is, you thought you were protecting your daughter," he said softly. "That means this kind of fear has become normal to you." She broke down completely after hearing that. The younger police officer finally stepped forward. "Mr. Brooks, for what it's worth, you handled today with more grace than most people could." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Grace is survival for people like me." Nobody spoke after that because everyone understood exactly what he meant. Then Daniel looked toward the supermarket windows where dozens of customers were still watching from inside. "You know what hurts most?" he said quietly. "My son asked me last week why I always dress nicely before going shopping." The officers exchanged glances. Daniel looked down at the grocery bags in his hands. "I told him, sometimes people treat you better when you look safe to them. But the truth is, sometimes even that isn't enough." The pain in his voice settled heavily over everyone standing there. Lily's mother wiped her tears and whispered, "Your son is lucky to have you." Daniel looked toward the sunset for a moment before answering, "I just hope one day he can walk into a store without needing people to see him as harmless before they see him as human." Nobody had words for that. The evening air felt colder now. Daniel opened his car door slowly, placing the groceries inside. Before getting in, he looked back one final time at the small crowd standing there in guilt and silence. "I don't need everyone to like me," he said calmly. "I just need people to stop turning our skin into suspicion." Then he got into the car and drove away beneath the fading orange sky while the people left behind stood motionless in that parking lot, carrying the heavy realization that a good man had walked into a grocery store for bread and milk, and walked out carrying the weight of an entire country's fear once again.